Welcome to Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. I'm your host, Joy Vacherbeck, here with my co-host, Mark Renahan.
How you doing today, Joy?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Excellent.
And today is the second in our four-part series titled Perspectives on Afghanistan, Past, Present, and Future. On today's podcast, we'll have a Army veteran who served in both Afghanistan and Iraq.
Absolutely. So today we have joining us Mr. Tyler Burke. Tyler spent time, as we stated, both in Afghanistan and Iraq as a member of the United States Army. He is retired now and enjoying horseback riding, as we just found out. But Tyler is here today to tell us a little bit about his career and his experiences in Afghanistan and what he thinks are some of the issues there today. Tyler, how you doing?
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. So, Tyler, we usually like to just jump right in and have you kind of tell us a little bit about how you got involved serving with the Army.
Yeah, I was in the Army for an Army National Guard for about 23 years, and I started as a tanker, and then moved to progressively lighter units. 2003, 2004. I was in the 1st Armored Division. I spent about 9 months in Baghdad as a tank platoon leader. And if you remember hearing the Iron Triangle, and then spent some time in Germany and ended up in Afghanistan for the year in 2010. And if you remember the surge that we had, and I was in RC East, kind of north of Kabul, and then briefly spent some time in Africa in 2013. So the first half of my career, I was enlisted, and I retired as a major.
So, Tyler, one of the questions, we're talking about Afghanistan here, and I know our last guest, she had never traveled out of the country, and Afghanistan was her first foreign trip. I'm pretty sure you had traveled prior to your time in Afghanistan, but I was just curious, what was your initial reaction when arriving in Afghanistan, and what was your overall take on the country in general?
Well, I'd previously deployed, but really hadn't. The first thing when the door opened of the C-130 is to smell the smells, and the blast of hot air hits your face. Headed back into the Super Bowl again for a second time. I really knew what we were kind of getting into. My first deployment, I was pretty young, 23 years old. But then into Afghanistan, I think I was 31 years old. And we were very high morale. And we, were on a mission. And, but I knew the moments were going to get tough. And they certainly did. But we got through it, and most of us came home.
Now, can you compare Iraq to Afghanistan, of the two places? I know there are a lot of veterans who have been to both, but you're the first one I've actually think I've spoken to recently. What are the differences between Iraq and Afghanistan?
Well, really, the Iraq War was a war waged against a single person, Saddam Hussein, and his government. And in Afghanistan, it was a war waged against terrorist groups, the Taliban and Al Qaeda. In Iraq, initially, we were basically fighting the remnants of what were the Iraqi Special Forces. Very soon thereafter, early in 2004, it really became a proxy war between the United States and Iran. And the Iranian, Quds Force and, their special forces did a lot of training and financing and equipping of what was the insurgent enemy that we were fighting in Iraq. In Afghanistan, we were fighting really basically two major groups, the Taliban, which is, the religious backed, the religious kind of government. And they came to power after the Soviets had left Afghanistan, there was a 10-year proxy war between the United States. It was led by the United States, but it was kind of a coalition of forces. And we backed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviets. And when the Soviets left, we kind of left as well, along with our funding. And there was a vacuum for leadership, and the Taliban stepped in. And they live in the 15th century. Really, that's their idea of what the world should be today. And those ideals really don't comport with the Western world. They lent their support to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and allowed them to.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, it allowed them to operate in their country, and then that was after 9/11. That was our reason for our invasion of our conventional forces into Afghanistan.
That is similar to what our last guest was saying. And Tyler, thank you for your service there. And you said you were north of Kabul. Were you in Bagram area, and did you get to go to other areas in Afghanistan as well?
Yeah, I was primarily based out of Bagram, and I went to Kabul a few times, and the Salong Tunnel, which leads to Mazar-e Sharif, the big town in the north, was kind of the northern part of our area. And we were I was in the Vermont National Guard at that time, and we went over as a brigade. Initially, we were under the 82nd Airborne Division, and then the 82nd Airborne left, and the 101st Airborne took over, and that was our division command, or the regional command. That was our boss. So we had units in, I want to say, 7 provincial areas, and mostly to the north and east of Bagram.
Interesting. So Tyler, let me ask you some more questions. While you were in Afghanistan, comparing it, you met obviously a lot of the civilians and the people. I know that right now, I've talked to some friends who were in Afghanistan, and a lot of people are concerned. We had a lot of friends there that are now. There are a lot of Afghans immigrating to the U.S. It's a very different culture over there, as you were saying. It's 15th kind of century. Do you think that's going to be an issue with them? When I say them, with any Afghans who are immigrating to the U.S. today?
Well, really, the past 20 years, we haven't had Taliban rule. So, there's going to be huge differences. I'll just say that there's going to be huge differences. However, the folks that at least had priority to immigrate to the United States are those people that worked with our forces as interpreters, worked for the embassy, and so they're pre-vetted that their values kind of comport with ours, and that they'll be able to assimilate into our culture, into our country. But the problem that we were seeing during the really the botched evacuation of Afghanistan was just crowds rushing, and we're not. I'm a retired guy now, and just talking to other retired guys, and maybe some people that are still in. The plane loads of people that were coming over, you'd see just full of like mail, and not the families that we were kind of expecting. And so it's like, okay, the people that we're letting in right now, are these the people that were vetted, or were they just swarmed and they got in? Did they steal someone else's credentials? It is not sophisticated in Afghanistan, and the credentialing is, quite rudimentary. So I would be just really hesitant to make sure that the right people got in. And I'm just
I've
heard
heard a lot of concerns about that as well.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that were vetted and were promised safe passage to the United States were left abandoned. They're still there. And we have previously promised them a ticket to paradise here in exchange for putting their families and their lives on the line for being our interpreters and working in our embassy, and we just left them. So it's, that's a concern as well.
On that matter, do you believe there is chances of still getting them out?
Absolutely. As long as there is a person that's alive, there's hope for getting them out. And, there are efforts, I think, that are underway as we speak. But, I certainly think more can be done. A lot more could have been done to prevent this if we had retained the Bagram airfield before collapsing that down into Kabul. That was the strategic error here.
That's a question I had myself.
Yeah. When as soon as it was reported in the news that the Bagram airfield had been given up, but we hadn't evacuated yet, and we were pulling back to Kabul, a lot of us vets were sorry, we were talking. It's an emotional thing for a lot of us because. Sorry.
No,
Tyler, we understand,
yes,
Tyler. We
absolutely.
understand.
We knew right then it was going to be a total disaster, and it hadn't really hit the fan yet. But we knew because the airfield in Kabul it's in a city, and there's no way to easily defend that and to facilitate the evacuation of people, because as soon as you step 1 foot outside the gate or the wire, you're in enemy territory. Where in Bagram, that airfield is surrounded by miles and miles and miles of open desert. So people just are going to be covered. It's very easy to get people into Bagram airfield, to get them out. And there's thousands of our security forces that were there that would have been able to facilitate that. And then the question went up, okay, why did the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, who's a very competent infantry officer, SF officer, he was a very basic military strategy blunder. Why did he allow this to happen? There's in the military, when you're given an order by a superior officer, it's incumbent upon you to make sure it passes the electric Kool-Aid acid test. Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it ethical? And if it violates one of those, then it's an illegal order, is what we consider it. So you have then an obligation to disobey that order or just press pause, seek further clarification. And this didn't happen in Afghanistan. And we really saw the future about 3 weeks out, I think, and we saw it really unraveling very quickly.
So, what would you like to? What would you like to see happen in the future over there? I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I know we discussed offline that there might be a humanitarian crisis over there shortly. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that.
I believe that's already happening.
Yeah, right now we are, so the Afghan forces.
Hey, Tyler?
Yeah.
Tyler, you don't have a volume button on your computer that you could turn up a little bit, do you? Could you lean in? I'm just having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
You hear me now better?
I've got you.
All right, now I got you. It must
Okay.
just be my
All
earpiece.
right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So the past 20 years, the movement of fuel for heating and cooking has been facilitated by the United States military and by the United States State Department. It has been paid for through the United States, and just that's the past 20 years. We've been doing everything really for them, as far as paying for it, the transport, electricity, and now you have an entire generation of Afghans that are going to their first winter. It is very, very cold in Afghanistan. They're going to their first winter where the heads of the electrical departments and the government agencies have been replaced with Islamic clerics. And even reported in the Wall Street Journal, they really are having a tough time accomplishing basic tasks that the government has to do to take care of its population. Now that the funding is largely gone and the security situation is deteriorated, by this time here in November, we'd already, my unit in Afghanistan a decade ago now, we'd gone through a winterization campaign where we'd provided security for fuel trucks and got the Afghan population ready for winter. And now they're going to be, there's going to be families in Afghanistan. There's like 4 million, 5 million people alone in Kabul that are going to be going without heat. And when it is freezing cold, that's really difficult. So the next, gigantic humanitarian crisis, which is going to be above the fold that we're going to see when we get into the winter months, is really unfolding right now. There's little we can do right now, but the unfortunate thing is the people that are actually running the company, the country, is the Taliban. So what would I like to see? What I think we have to see is we have to see cooperation with the Taliban, and we have to provide funds and probably directly to the companies that in Eastern Europe that provide the fuel, and to facilitate the transport of that fuel and those supplies, whether we like it or not. We spent the past 20 years fighting them, but they're the only ones that are there right now. And it's a tough pill to swallow, especially doing multiple deployments and fighting these people. And we've been very passionate about it for a long time. We just have to put the ego in the drawer. Otherwise, it's going to be quite catastrophic, and it'll be on the conscience of a lot of us.
So you kind of answered what I was about to ask you, but and not to get to whatever, but I think you and a lot of the other veterans that I talked to are obviously, I guess I don't really have the right word for it, irritated that the Taliban is back in control. I'm assuming that it's just like you said, a ridiculous pill to swallow, tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, it's very frustrating because we saw 18 months of not a single U.S. Or coalition combat casualty. The situation was clearly under control. There was security, basic security in the country. It was not perfect, and the Afghan forces were learning slowly. They were not ready yet. It is a fact that our intelligence agencies and our service operations personnel have had provided feedback to the leadership, the civilian leadership that controls the U.S. military, that the Afghan forces were not ready to handle their own security yet. When you break it, you buy it. It takes years to rebuild a nation, and if it was going to be a foreign policy change that we don't do nation building going forward, that's great. I really don't think we should be personally involved in nation building. But when you're already 20 years into a really kind of a disaster, that you need to see it through. Would it take 3, 5, 10 more years? It's hard to tell. Probably, maybe. But it was critical that the Afghans be able to defend themselves first against in a very capable enemy, and we did it such that we handed over $80 billion worth of U.S. military equipment. This is the latest and greatest stuff. This is what our infantry, armor, and aviation units use. $80 billion in a matter of days went from the Afghan National Army and Air Force, and was handed over incomplete to the Taliban. They have Black Hawk helicopters, they have Humvees, they have our uniforms, they have M4 carbines, 50 caliber machine guns, all ready, night vision, color night vision, and they have a fully equipped military, at least the equipment. And
it's unbelievable, Tyler, what they did there. And
yeah.
I have 2 questions here. Like you mentioned about they weren't ready yet. We don't hear as much about Afghan and what's going on exactly, but is there any resistance forces still putting up a fight, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. I don't receive any up-to-the-minute reports, but we do know as soon as the country fell, I had actually floated up through some friends that are still serving the Panjshir River Valley. I spent a lot of time there. That was the last holdout that actually fell. And for a couple of weeks after the fall of Afghanistan, that valley, that river valley is kind of a highway that goes up to a country to the northeast, Tajikistan. And my suggestion was to evacuate the forces or the friendly people that in American passport holders that were left there back out through the Panjshir River Valley on the ground, versus having everyone continue to go to the Kabul airport where the Taliban had roadblocks set up. So,
and the dangers of ISIS as well.
Yeah, the Panjshir Valley is where Masood, I believe, who was one of the original anti-Taliban Afghan fighters, it was originally from. They called him the Panjshir of the Lion of the Panjshir, I believe, back in the day.
Yeah, the Panjshir Lion. Yes, absolutely. And we spent a lot of months preparing for our Afghanistan fight, and read quite a few books, like the Bear Went Over the Mountain, and studied these ambush sites and read about these former Mujahideen commanders. And we had the unique opportunity to actually squat in the same ambush positions that were used against the Soviets, and the burned out hulks of the Soviet tanks and armored personnel carriers were out in the killing fields, like exactly as they are depicted in the books and the battle aftermath studies. So that was really unique experience. And
it's kind of seeing history up front and live.
Exactly. And getting access to places in the world and cultures that you can't go into Afghanistan today.
I mean, it's terrible it is to have had gone to war and stuff. It must have just been, I know it's I don't want to say, it's a 15th century, as you said, society over there, but it must have been at least I'm trying to think of the right word here, but I guess interesting,
It-
whatever.
Yeah, it was a
must have been really-
developing society, and the young people were, when we were there, the young people were going to university, and there were entrepreneurs, and there were like women's medical clinics, and women were in executive positions in government. But today, that has all changed. Overnight, university students had to turn in their, that's Des that you saw back there. My wife, Des, was in the Army for 6 years as well.
Okay.
Excellent.
And they, people had to burn all association with institutions of higher learning, and women were just immediately put into the burqa, and in a lot of cases sold or married off to Taliban fighters, like within days. So it's really disappointing to see the rollback that took place in a very short period of time, and it did not have to be this way.
Yeah, our last guest, she worked with Afghan police women, and she was talking about
And
the same.
those Afghan police women today are not Afghan police women.
Sadly.
Day number one of Taliban rule, any evidence of their prior affiliation or vocation would have had to been into the burn barrel instantly. And they are in really dire circumstances right now. I just feel for them.
Yeah.
Tyler, not to rewind for a quick second, but one of the things that I know a lot of people were saying after we left Afghanistan, and you were talking about all the supplies that we left in terms of helicopters, Humvees. There was an argument kind of out there from some groups of people like, oh, well, we left them and they don't know how to use it, it's worthless. But I'm assuming that you would disagree with that statement?
Yeah, we saw, Black Hawk helicopter flying with, the Taliban flag, and the pilots, and they have families in the area, and pretty standard practice to just hold the pilots and any people with a higher degree, hold their families hostage, and whether they are sympathetic to the West or not, it's a very clear-cut choice. If you want your family to live, you're going to fly the helicopter, you're going to maintain the helicopter, or whatever military equipment that we left there. And so we saw direct evidence. I heard the same thing that you did from political leadership here. Oh, the sophisticated equipment. That just isn't true. And their ability to obtain repair parts is certainly terrible, and they're not going to keep the aircraft flying for long. That's for sure. But what we found in 20 years of war, these battles are not won or lost with very sophisticated equipment. It comes down to a lot of footwork in and out of the valleys with machine guns, and really a lot of the same equipment that's been around since the Second World War.
Boots on the ground is what they say. You can't win wars without boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground, backpack, ammo, and that's how the fighting is.
My second question, going back, Tyler, to where you were saying they were not prepared yet for us to leave, was there a plan at all in place, other than just pulling out of Bagram and then Kabul, obviously, after that? But was there a plan in place as well for the humanitarian crisis you were talking about, as far as not having oil and heat for the winters, somehow to be able to wean them off?
There's really no plan that didn't involve coalition forces or a functioning Afghan defense department that is financed by the international community, chiefly the United States. And when the decision was made to evacuate, it is just glaringly obvious that there was no plan or consideration for the Afghan people that would be left behind. And as we saw, and as we were embarrassed on the national stage, we left hundreds of Americans with United States passports behind. And to this day, the last time I saw in the journal reports of over 200 passport holders still in the country. And I think the current administration just wants the problem to go away, wants the American people to get bored and forget about it.
But yes, because you don't hear as much about it.
Ignore the problem, it'll go away. I actually tried that strategy often, and it never works. So, but anyway, Tyler, we have reached our half hour, and I don't want to keep you too long, as I know you are a busy man. But I wanted to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about your time. I want to thank you for your service and for talking to us about Afghanistan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Tyler.
And Doug owes you a steak, Tyler.
Yeah.
I'll make sure you get it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Tyler, listen, we want to thank you so much for coming on. For all you watching at home, you can follow us on Facebook at Protecting Our Freedoms. We're on YouTube, Rumble, all of the social media platforms. This was part 2 in our 4-part series on Afghanistan. We'll be coming back to you next Tuesday after this with yet another part of our series, and we wanted to thank you for coming in. Once again, we had Tyler Burke. Tyler is a retired Army veteran who served both in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Joy, you want to take us out?
Yes, thank you to our listeners, and join us again next time as we bring you the stories on protecting our freedoms.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.